kind of nonsensical. He calls it, what does he call it? Cabin fever as you get closer to the draft. But what really got things stirring this morning was apparently on Reddit, this guy, Sal Agreeable 2834, had said that Will Levis is currently plus 4,000 to be the first overall pick. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he's telling friends and family that Carolina will, in fact, take him on Thursday. You're welcome. Now, this was before the odds had shifted, obviously. Later on, Jamie Eisner pointed out that Will Levis went to plus 500 on the odds boards. And Bryce Young remained number one overall, but that Will Levis had skyrocketed up to number two. I did a little bit of digging, and I kind of started looking into some of the things that didn't quite make sense. This is while I was on air, and not all of it completely made sense to me. This is the one that you guys are going to have to explain to me, and this might be because like there's errant pronoun usage or sloppy pronoun usage used, but 3 weeks ago, Bryce Young stopped taking visits because Carolina told him they weren't taking him. Houston said they were. Last night, Carolina told Will they're taking him, which is why the odds moved heavily for him to be the second overall pick. I mean, I don't understand the second overall pick there, unless if Bryce Young had shifted to be the number two overall pick, which I hadn't noticed that, but I don't know if the he's talking about is Bryce Young, or excuse me, did I say C.J. Stroud? I'm all messed up now, or Will Levis. I frankly, I'm not buying it because, for one, Sal Agreeable 2834, at least this account joined Reddit on April 18th, 2023. Some people pointed out that, hey, he's probably just covering his tracks so he doesn't get in trouble. Like, okay, great. He's some guy who joined, like, it's some random account. We've been through this with Jose Altuve. We've been through this with some random person on the internet claiming that they were Carlos Beltran's niece, and people ran with that. And then we're repeating this whole thing all over again. This is where, when somebody points to himself in a story that can't be verified as evidence of his credibility. People said the same thing a few years ago when I said Baker was going to Cleveland. Take the money while you can. I don't know, man.
I would say.
Okay, so we'll get to this in a second. I'm not buying that Will Levis is going to go to. I'm not buying that Will Levis is going to the Panthers number one overall. I'm just not. I'm flat out not going to. I know I made that video about Will Levis a couple days ago that had a lot of people ready to jump out of a tall building over the prospect of the Texans or your team taking Will Levis. And I felt like I tried to point out some of the positives there. It came out a little bit maybe just slanted in favor of like people latching onto the negatives about Will Levis. But I got to be honest with you. I have a hard time finding anybody who gushes about Will Levis. So I went and I got a couple of the clips. I got Josh McCown, JT O'Connell, former NFL quarterback. He got kicked around a little bit, but he's a really, really smart guy. And he's got a YouTube channel called the QB School. I got Ben Solak, our old friend, who is critical of Levis, but actually feels that he might have the best chance of being here in the NFL in 10 years. And then I want to listen to Orlovksy talk about Anthony Richardson, and then Kurt Warner on C.J. Stroud, just to kind of revisit some of the C.J. Stroud flack that's been out there, since he seems to be the object of all of the quarterback dinging that goes on this time of year, where all of a sudden somebody gets their stock, their name dragged through the mud. So there's been like somewhat tepid praise of Will Levis as a prospect, and everybody always seems to want to qualify it a little bit. This has been a very, very stressful bout of looking through quarterbacks right now for the Texans, and or for any of these guys. Here is Josh McCown, who, remember, it's relevant now because as supposedly Will Levis is now the second most favorite to go number one overall to the Panthers. Let's remember what Vegas has told us so far about, and like how informed Vegas is on these prop bets, which frankly they don't really put, like, the prop bets are almost like a novelty item, and a few movements in gambling like, or better movement can really affect the line more so than like on a heavily bet football game. So take all of this with a grain of salt. When Josh McCown had challenged C.J. Stroud to a game of horse, that was like evidence that, oh, C.J. Stroud's definitely going to Carolina. Did you see Josh McCown's talking about playing horse with him? Like, all right. And then all of a sudden it became Bryce Young's the prohibitive favorite, and everybody knows. Ian Rappaport is the one man out there that I respect the most because he's just flat out saying, look, I'm not getting any information from the Texans. I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm not getting any information. And Ian Rappaport was the guy who I think of the national media members was the most in tune with what the Texans were going to do in terms of hiring D'Amico Ryans. Everybody else thought it was cuckoo. And Rappaport was saying, like, pump your brakes there. It's a possibility. So here's Josh McCown after watching the first couple games of the 2023 seasons. And I'll show you some of the positives that Josh McCown had to say about Will Levis. I want to put this out here too, because if the Texans take Will Levis, it's not like completely without merit. I'm going to be really, really surprised, but let's like reiterate some of the positives of Will Levis.
Say stature and arm strength and arm efficiency. This guy doesn't move a lot to make the ball come out fast. He's very efficient in his motion and his mechanics. And I would say as a first look, that's the thing that jumped.
How about I give you guys the video too? Let's do that.
Out of me initially, and I think you see that on the tape. And so there's a lot of throwing power with this guy. And if you look at him compared to the guys you just mentioned, and where do they all stack up, and what are their superpowers and their elite traits? And this for him is what he's going to hang his hat on. Is his stature. He's a big guy, more kind of your tradish, 6'4", 230-pound, big, strong quarterback that can spit the ball out.
Yeah, so a lot of that, what I hear, honestly, when people talk about that is, okay, I hear traits. And traits are very much kind of on the personnel side of things. And then when you see coaches talk about Will Levis, they're a little bit less forgiving of some of the mistakes he makes on the field, the errors in judgment, sometimes the poor pocket mobility, all of those things. But he has these traits. He has the ability to throw it really well and really far. And you can, and then Josh McCown throughout here has some criticisms for Will Levis as well. But again, I just want to try to focus on some of the positives in case you're a Texans fan or a Panthers fan and you think your team is like completely absurdly out to lunch if they draft Will Levis. I'm still going to be surprised. I fall on the coach side of things and the player side of things, where a guy comes into camp and you're like, I don't know what the GM was seeing with this guy, but I'm not seeing it. So the comp that Josh McCown, quarterback's coach for the Panthers, makes to Will Levis is also a little bit curious. If you're thinking like, okay, is this a guy I want to draft number 1 overall or number 2 overall?
Reminds me a little bit of
get you up here again
of my buddy I played with in Chicago, Jay Cutler. Coming out of Vanderbilt, where you're playing maybe with not as talented dudes in the SEC and going against the Georgias. And so you're used to having to make these kind of contested, tight area throws, and he's showing off the arm strength. And so I love to see that. You want to see more and more of this. Like, if that's who you are, if you're a big, strong dude that's got to stand back there and make throws, I want to see that on the tape over and over again. You see that right here.
Okay, now that's where, this is, again, when it comes into the elegant excuse making for Josh McCown, that came after a play where Josh McCown had kind of forced the difficult throw and he had made it. And yet you're still in this world where you're saying like, well, all right. I mean, maybe the reason, it feels like you're buying a used car and you're like, well, I mean, it sure looks like it had flood damage, but maybe that's just the lighting or something. You're bending over backwards to figure out a reason why this guy might not be doing the things you want him to do. But it's like, but you're spending a really high draft pick on him. Again, like, look, so that's a part I understand the upside. I understand that with that bad supporting cast, they might feel like, hey, the upside of Will Levis is that when things are right, when his footwork is right, when he understands what he's supposed to be doing, like it was in 2021. And Josh Norris from the Underdog podcast here with Josh McCown, which it's linked below. These guys are really good. These are the people that do Steve Smith's podcast. and they do a really good job of kind of blending the technical with the entertaining side of it, like Steve Smith's especially. But this is the point Josh Norris brings up about that.
Yeah, and what I've also heard, Josh, is that 2021 is much better than 2022. It might be the injury. It might be the OC change from Liam Cohen to Rich Gangarello.
So that's the Liam Cohen was the offensive coordinator in 2021. Then he leaves. Scangarello comes in. Scangarello gets fired at the end of the year. And I've told you guys before, these are the kinds of the things when they're going through Will Levis's perhaps bad decisions or questionable progressions or anything like that. People kind of always politely say, I don't know what Scangarello was thinking here or how he designed the play. That's the one. Texans fan in rehab says, yes, that Will Levis video had me standing on a ledge. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. But look, this is the way I see it as I go through and I listen to all these different people who have played in the game. I will say the guys that I found, there's an old GM. I can't think of his name right now. And another personnel people, the people that have been most in favor of Will Levis tend to be on the personnel side of things. Like they see, this is the problem with scouts and personnel people. Not to lump everybody together, but sometimes this is an issue. The scouts are never getting booed on the sideline, and their headlines are never their faces aren't in the headline after a game in which Will Levis throws 3 interceptions. Now the GM it is, but the mindset coming through, like think about head coach. Head coach goes through a progression where let's say he starts off as a receivers coach and his receivers aren't producing. And people are wondering, like, maybe it's a receivers coach. What the hell? Then he becomes an offensive coordinator, and maybe his quarterback is a slack-jawed idiot. But people don't know that. They just don't like the offensive coordinator. So they blame the offensive coordinator. By the time he gets to be a head coach, the head coach is keenly aware of different times in which guys just flat out can't play football, no matter how athletic they looked or how matter rippled their abs are. And what happens is, like, those personnel guys aren't getting that scrutiny. They're coming up and they're just kind of nameless, faceless scouts, bebopping around and staying in Marriotts and collecting travel points and everything. And then all of a sudden they're GM and it's already ingrained in their brain. They're like, oh, traits. Oh, look at the way he throws it, all that stuff. And they're a little spoiled because of it. So this is JT O'Connell. Am I getting his name right there? Yeah. He's got a really good YouTube called The QB School, where you can really, like, he breaks down, you can learn a lot. Like if you got a young quarterback in your family, have him subscribe to that channel. But this JT O'Connell, after he broke down, I believe the Ole Miss game, I'm not showing a lot of these clips because the SEC has gotten super finicky about clips and they're starting to issue a lot of copyright strikes. So I'm giving you JT O'Connell's assessment of what he thought after watching the Ole Miss tape.
You put it in context that he's battling through some injuries, that he gets hurt in this game, that he continues to battle. There are some really nice anticipation throws. Now, is it as precise and as consistent as some of the guys who potentially might go ahead of him in this draft? Probably not. But I can see the blueprint, the foundation for potentially something that could be really good on Sundays, because he does have the velocity with his arm. He does have the ability to tote the rock a little bit. I don't think it goes his way at the end, obviously, but there were more plays in this game that I really liked and think translate to Sundays than I had seen before in any other game. So I'm excited to probably see a little bit more, but right now feeling pretty good about Will Levis, how he looked on film. Excited to see more. Thank you so much for hanging to the end. I will see you next time. Have a good one.
Yeah, so, like, he's not as precise. He's not as consistent. Consistent's a word that keeps coming up. And yet when he does it, it looks really, really good. And I think some of this comes down to not just coach versus personnel guy, but also, just maybe like, what can I do? Like, how good am I going to be as a coach, or how possible is it that I take him and mold him? The one thing that I think helps Will Levis a lot and maybe is changing things in his favor, if indeed this smoke about him, now being number 2 most favored to go to Carolina. If you're just joining us, I explained, I think a lot of this is based on just a random Reddit account that I'm not alone in that opinion. Basically, I think he might be getting game stopped. I think there might be a fever of speculation and gambling and putting money down on Will Levis because of one Reddit thread, and that has made Vegas respond by dialing up the odds there to discourage betting. But we'll find out that part of it eventually. I do think that if you can take him in the fact that he's working with Jordan Palmer, who's the coach who's worked with Josh Allen and gotten a lot better footwork, accuracy, everything else out of Josh Allen, that might work with some of the coaches. I don't think it's as simple or as lazy as somebody saying, well, hey, Jordan Palmer worked with Josh Allen and Josh Allen got better, so why not just go with Will Levis? The stuff with Josh Allen was very detailed, working with high-speed cameras the way the Astros do really, really well. And you see the Astros and the work they've done with pitches. A lot of that is because when they work with these high-speed cameras, they can dial it down to exactly how much weight you're putting on your back foot, exactly what your hip positioning needs to be. They did all that stuff with Josh Allen, and it made a big difference. So teams and their conversations with Jordan Palmer right now would be really, really interesting. It's the one thing that makes me not want to jump out of a tall window when I think about the Texans potentially drafting Will Levis, because I'm very skeptical, but there is a chance. Here's Ben Solak. So Ben Solak, who breaks down film for The Ringer, he's linked below as well, as long as JT O'Connell. I've shown you, some of you guys have seen part of this clip already. Again, I'm truncating the clips to try to avoid copyright strikes. But he was really critical in that video that I did the other day of Will Levis. His conclusion in that video was that he still thinks that Will Levis might actually have the best chance of sticking around the longest of any of these quarterbacks. I feel like he's very conflicted about Will Levis, and he's a much smarter guy than I am. But here's a dose of a nice play that Ben Solak pointed out.
The ball placement is great because of the safety that's going to close down this route, right? Levis gets top of his drop, ready to throw this ball.
And watch this ball, by the way, graze the earlobe of the umpire standing there.
As he's releasing it, you're going to see this safety coming in to just light this Christmas tree up, right? So now you have to throw to protect your receiver. Throw with velocity, get the ball there fast, and throw with placement. Bring him down and away from this safety, protect the football, and that's catch. Also cool to watch the throwing motion, right? This is the thing about Levis. NFL teams are going to like this. Look at him get the feet set, right? Enough room this time for the hips to come around. He still kind of locks himself out with that toe, right? You see how this toe is still pointed this way when he's throwing here? That's still suboptimal, and it pulls him to his right a little bit, right? You can see how he kind of leans over, and that arm comes away from the body. But man, that arm snaps around, and it helps him get the ball out really fast.
Yeah, so he was he really broke down his footwork well, and I encourage you to go watch that video if you want to get a better in-depth look at him. But you still very much see the upside. On that throw right there, he can lace it with accuracy, with good timing. He can do all of those things. And some of the speculation about him either working with Frank Reich or going to the Texans or working with Shane Steichen or anything else has been that with Scangarello, his offensive coordinator this last year, he may have just had too much uncertainty. He might have been thinking about too many things. His receivers weren't on the same page. Sometimes their fault, sometimes his fault, mostly perhaps Scangarello's fault. But that in an offense like the 49ers, the Texans, the Coop Shanastani offense, that with more defined definitions of what he's supposed to be doing, that you could see more of that. As far as the umpire standing there right there, by the way, they used to do that in the NFL. And one time I knocked an umpire out of the game. And I think that's one of the reasons they don't stand behind. I was actually integral in moving the umpires back behind the offensive, behind the offense on the line of scrimmage. Because there was a play out to the flats. I turned to run and chase, and there was somebody in front of me, and I could tell it wasn't my uniform, So I just shoved. And it turned out it was the umpire, and I'm looking at it as I'm running to the ball, and he was out cold. His name's Garth DeFelice. Awesome dude. Got to know him a little bit after that. We used to BS about it before each game when he was out there. And then he'd throw a defensive holding flag or two, and we had a really good time. Real quick, just since this has become a theme now. When you see anybody talking about 169 on here, so one of you is referring to Bryce Young as 169 now, because reportedly, according to an unnamed scout, Bryce Young weighed 169 pounds by the end of the season 2 years ago. I'm not so sure about that. Right here, real quick, before we go on to the other quarterbacks, Jeremy Fowler from ESPN. I got a little peeved the other day because they were doing that thing, and I cut out the most annoying parts. Jeremy Fowler, in talking about what the Texans were going to do, was doing that kind of thing like, well, no matter what they do, they're going to screw it up. Because you guys know that. If Bryce Young doesn't get taken number 1 overall and the Texans draft Bryce Young, it's going to rapidly turn into like, Texans don't seem to realize that Bryce Young weighs perhaps 169 pounds. I heard he was 132 just yesterday morning.
I think Levis is going to go earlier.
A lot of throwing power. A lot of throwing power.
First, we'll get Solak here.
Still kind of locks himself out with that toe, right? You see how this toe is still pointed like this way?
Let's go past Solak. You guys are awesome for sticking with me. This is him talking about like nice things about Stroud.
Does not have the ceiling to amaze.
About Will Levis. He does not have the ceiling to amaze.
You're going to have to protect him by running the scheme that's meant for him. But you have to protect all rookie quarterbacks, and most of them are scheme dependent. Most quarterbacks in the NFL need the right scheme to succeed. The fan base of the team that drafts Levis,
talking about you guys,
is inevitably going to be like, darn, we missed out on all these.
Darn is what you'll be saying.
Really other exciting fireworks options. But you take me 10 years in the future, and Levis is the only one in this class left, just like toughing it out.
This next part, just brace yourselves.
Taking hits on the chin and just distributing the ball delightfully as the 11th best quarterback in the NFL.
I know. I can't take it. I can't take that if it's a ceiling, Ben. I respect your analysis, Ben, but damn it, we're out here on the streets. We're out here dealing with I'm not going to take a guy who maybe could be as good as the 11th best quarterback in the NFL. Hey, 10 years from now, he might be your Kirk Cousins.
NFL, I won't be the least bit surprised. And the NFL likes that. The NFL tends to go for security. So,
yeah. So they do tend to go for security. I think that I don't listen, everybody. I don't think it's happening. I can't find anybody that actually seems like they really, really like Will Levis. I just can't. But if the Texans do, I will talk myself into it by giving myself an IV drip of Will Levis highlights, ignoring anything. I will put filters on my phone that keep people from showing me all the many, many bad plays or anything like that. Here's Fowler, I think.
It's fascinating. This is the most unpredictable team in the draft right now. I've talked to multiple general managers who say, I have no idea what Houston is doing.
Yeah, so, okay. Did you hear that? No idea.
And then
as Ian Rappaport said, nobody's telling Ian Rappaport squat. I'm not buying anything from anybody that they know what the Texans are doing other than because, when Peter King talks about it, he'll say things like, I talked to somebody who is acquainted very well with the Texans. All right, well, that's different than somebody in the Texans.
Yeah, look at an option like Trey Lance. Maybe they could trade for Trey Lance because of the D'Amico Ryans connection in Houston. He knows Trey Lance.
Do you hear her talking like the Texans are the dumbest people ever for thinking about trading for Trey Lance?
Well,
okay, so this gets interesting here. Fowler does make a good point about the Trey Lance trade, which I have warmed up to a little bit just because the 49ers, my theory is okay, you're not going to do more with a quarterback than Kyle Shanahan did. However, there's two things. One is that the 49ers, partly because of, ironically enough, trading for Trey Lance, but as well as trading for other players, they need draft picks. They don't have they don't have a first or second rounder this year. They've got 3 third rounders, all by compensation for coaching hires, minority coaching hires, and or compensatory picks. But they could use some draft picks. They don't have a lot of cap space, so going with Brock Purdy and getting rid of Trey Lance's contract, it's still a rookie contract. It's not bad. Might make sense. She says that why would they go with Trey Lance, who has only 8 games of experience, versus C.J. Stroud? C.J. Stroud's got 0 years of experience. I don't know. I would feel better about trading for Trey Lance with a a third round pick. It'd probably take more than that. But I would feel better about that right this moment than I would Will Levis. But 6'1", half dozen of the other physical talent with upside. But here's Fowler, and I hadn't really thought about this, and I'm not. Tell me if you're buying this about why the 49ers might be open to trading Trey Lance.
They signed Sam Darnold.
That's what he said. He said Sam Darnold.
Sneaky good signing. I've talked to
He said sneaky good signing.
multiple teams who believe Darnold will play meaningful snaps, even as early as week 1 for San Francisco because of Brock Purdy's injury.
Yeah, I'm not buying that. There's no way, right? Like that's not. I guess they feel like they can get the most out of. They feel like they can get the most out of Sam Darnold, but I don't think that's their security blanket. I like the idea of them going for Sam Darnold, and who did show some good things in Carolina last year towards the end, but I just don't. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Somebody says they'll take Trey for a 6th round pick. I think it's probably going to end up costing more than that. I mean, what did Josh Rosen go for? It was he's going to go for more than Josh Rosen did.
No.
So, okay, Orlovksy on Anthony Richardson. Since I hardly ever see anything about the Texans taking Anthony Richardson, maybe I'm not looking at the right mock drafts. I know there have been a couple the last couple of days. He makes a good point here, and he makes 2 good points. I'm not buying the first point about Lamar Jackson.
Number one, I've been on this. Houston should try and trade for Lamar Jackson. You have the picks and you have the cap space to do it. If not, let's say that's not an option because Baltimore says no. If I was Houston, I would take Anthony Richardson out of Florida. 2 reasons why. Number one, I think the accuracy concerns or narrative around him are incorrect. I've pointed out that 106 teams in college football caught the football better than Florida last year. They were I can go to the Missouri game. There's 3 passes in that game for 40-plus yards that get dropped.
Yeah, and that is that's excuse making, but I'll take that level of excuse making. The other thing that he had brought up, and I didn't actually include it there because I wanted to get Kurt Warner in there, is that, remember that he doesn't have much experience, but NFL teams have gotten a lot better at doing kind of what Philadelphia did this year. It was like, all right, you know what? Let's just run Oklahoma's offense and we'll go college it up, and somewhere along the way, you'll get better as a passer, and we'll see. But we can be competitive. Anthony Richardson, of all NFL quarterbacks that have come out in the last few years, might be the guy that I least worry about running. I just think about the way like a young Cam Newton had people bounce off of him like he's a Sherman tank or something. No, that's not. Somewhere along the way, you got to learn how to play football. But the other point too is that Florida's offense is more pro ready than what a lot of these other guys are seeing. They do a lot of pre-snap shifts and motion, a lot of stuff that makes things mentally tougher for a quarterback. Their progressions are more advanced. Like it's not a dumbed down college offense. So Anthony Richardson isn't as raw as like somebody else who went to a super spread team that had, the guy might have started for 2 years, but he hasn't had much experience or reps doing more NFL caliber stuff. So Anthony Richardson does have this. As far as C.J. Stroud goes, I feel like C.J. Stroud's name has been dragged through the mud in a lot of ways over the last couple days, to the point where it almost feels like it's like people are almost treating him like they're treating Will Levis. And I understand whatever objections you might have about him. I think you just need to put some things in context and just to maybe cleanse the palate a little bit. Here's Kurt Warner talking about the positive aspects of C.J. Stroud.
So many good things on this tape. I love that he usually has a plan. He knows what he's looking at. He gets his eyes in the right spot, gets the ball out on time. Get the ball out on time, you don't have to overthrow the football. You watch this tape, and there's not really a single throw that I see where he's just driving the ball, throwing it 100 miles an hour. Everything has a nice trajectory. Everything is soft but firm. Does he have enough arm strength? Okay, he's throwing these things from the backside hash, right? He's throwing a backside hash go route out to the front side. He's throwing a back shoulder fade from the backside hash. I mean, we're seeing him do everything that you're going to need him to do in the course of an NFL game. Plenty of arm strength, but more importantly, the understanding of how to throw different balls is what I'm most impressed with.
Yeah, and again, that's where I think the Texans, okay, they have the whole David Mulligetta dynamic, which I fought against for a long time. I don't know. And this isn't because I'm hearing from anybody else. I'm just trying to remember that these are human beings. Like, in a perfect world, you don't let your personal feelings about an agent alter how you operate. But there's two things. One is that, okay, the Texans were in an extreme situation. I don't think that it bothers Caserio. I just wonder if maybe it bothers the McNairs. But I that part, I don't know. The other part is just simply that on a very much a business side of things, the Texans were just burned by a David Mulligetta client, a quarterback who signed a contract and then several months later tried to get out of that contract. And like in some ways, as much of a mess as the Texans have been the last couple of years, I wonder how much more of a mess it would have been and what a catastrophe it would have been if he had simply never had the allegations against him. Obviously, it'd be better for the world at large and America if he'd never had those allegations against him or never done any. If he'd never had this weird massage, whatever the hell it was that he was doing. But also just that it was like that's something that's hard to forget when it comes time to give a guy $30 million guaranteed. So I'm open to it being a possibility. I'm still a little bit skeptical, and I don't think anybody from the team has admitted as much. I think the McNairs have learned what to keep very, very close to the vest. So if that is, I don't think we're ever gonna. I don't think we'll necessarily ever hear like actual confirmation of that. As far as okay, so I wanted to sweeten you up that for a little bit with C.J. Stroud because the S2 cognition stuff, the test that measures your ability to track objects visually, reaction time, process things mentally, like on a football field. It's not an intelligence test, but it's a visual cognition test that a lot of teams are using. The military uses some version of that. Like all these people do this, or all these different organizations use it. And there is seemingly a correlation between good quarterback play and bad quarterback play with high tests and low tests on the S2 cognition. It's not absolute, but as they would tell you, or a lot of people would tell you, people with low scores don't tend to do well. C.J. Stroud scored in the 18th percentile, whereas Bryce Young scored in the 98th percentile. This is just a couple of the quotes showing exactly where that's coming from. Okay, the benchmark is 80. 80 and above is good. Stroud was 18. It's incredibly terrible. He's going to be off some teams' boards. He will not be picked by those teams. Another unnamed scout. This is all coming from Bob McGinn. Stroud scored an 18. That's like a red alert. Red alert. You can't take a guy like that. That's why I have Stroud as a bust. That, in conjunction with the fact, name one Ohio State quarterback that's ever done it in the league. I despise that line of thinking. I think it's awful. I don't care. Like, you can't, as far as the Ohio State part that's never done it in the league, because like every Hall of Fame quarterback almost came from a school where they hadn't produced a really good quarterback. There are no quarterback factories. Ohio State is really good at producing fool's gold. That's the problem. But that doesn't mean that every now and then amidst the fool's gold, there isn't like a nice big old juicy nugget of quarterback gold. So I don't buy that part. To put that in context though, this is, his name pops up here. This is on the McAfee show. And Pat McAfee does a great job with this guy from the S2 cognition test. But here, we'll put his name up here in a second.
That happened.
He's going to explain Branon Ally. He's going to explain exactly what happened with these leaks and how a lot of people might be jumping to conclusions with exactly how much they're reading into this.
Happened. My phone was blowing up from general managers and our attorney, and so we can't speak on specifics. What I will say is the list of scores that I have seen, 2 of those scores are not accurate. They're not accurate at all. And some of the reason could be for narrative purposes. The other reason is that they don't have context. So somebody could have gotten a list of very early scores. One of the athletes on that particular list, I know, had a difficult time making his way to the All-Star game. Things were delayed. He was in high demand. He was hungry, tired. It was 11 p.m., didn't want to do it. He was frustrated. We administered the test because we're asked to. We knew at that point in time, hey, we'll get you again. We'll get you at your pro day, your 30 visit. We did that, and his score is significantly higher than what is being reported in the media.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that. I'm not saying that it was C.J. Stroud.
Okay. Yeah, you're not saying.
Just that for context purposes, the scores that were leaked, there are a couple of them that are inaccurate, and there needs to be context behind that.
So that was good job by those guys. And, they actually had a funny, if you go back and get that clip, I didn't link that below because frankly, Pat doesn't need the help, but I will link that anyway, cause it's the right thing to do. Plus after Branon Ally leaves, they go on like 5 minutes of like things that you could do to try to assess how good a quarterback is under pressure. Like have a defensive lineman come running around the corner as you're trying to take it. It's really a good segment of his. I guess the two things about that. One is we talked about this morning. Hendon Hooker was at the Senior Bowl, and he was one of the guys that had a lower score. So and on the list that was released, Hendon Hooker and C.J. Stroud were the guys that had the lower scores. Hendon Hooker was at the Senior Bowl. I don't believe that C.J. Stroud was, but Hendon Hooker was there just to talk to teams. He's recovering from his ACL, so he wasn't going to play in it. So it kind of process of elimination, we think he's talking about C.J. Stroud and Hendon Hooker being the one specifically that he was talking about there. I guess I wonder with C.J. Stroud is if his score, if he retook the test and the score was better, would David Mulligetta be pushing that out there or something? Or is it that, okay, he could have taken it, it got better, but it still is nothing to write home about? He ends up getting the 50th or 60th percentile. I don't know. I would say in some of these unnamed scout quotes, there, a couple coaches and scouts have noted the same thing I've been saying is it's still a very small sample size when you talked about NFL quarterbacks who are successful. They've been doing this on NFL prospects for 7 years. And in that time of the 5, 6, 7, however you want to define successful quarterbacks that have come out of the draft, they've all apparently had high scores, but that's a small sample of successful quarterbacks, and it would be a shame to turn your nose up at a guy that could potentially be a really, really good NFL quarterback because of this relatively new test. And Branon Ally himself, because he understands statistics and everything, points out that you try to do a pretty good job of figuring out how somebody's going to react in situations. And you can take groups of people and say, oh, okay, people who score on this high test as a group tend to be good at whatever they're doing, whatever we're testing. But in terms of the individual there, it doesn't say slam dunk. Yeah, he's going to be good. He's going to be bad. There's plenty of brilliant people who score low on IQ tests and not as many unintelligent people who score high on IQ tests. But it's just, it's never 100% slam dunk guarantee. And Branon Ally said as much. I think I added one more thing here. Let's see. This was another unnamed scout on C.J. Stroud. I don't like bringing up, this is a fun quote. I don't like bringing it up, but he's Dwayne Haskins. Haskins might have been better than this guy. It was the off the field stuff with Haskins, the work ethic and all that, which is why no one's making that comparison. This guy has all that off field stuff. He's saying in a good way. CJ Stroud has the good off field stuff. Great young man and all that. He's very deliberate, very streaky. He can do it. And he's really not a big time playmaker, He's very quiet, introverted personality. I wasn't blown away. I'm not as worried about the personality. I think that's overblown sometimes. As far as the comparison, I'm not buying that 100%. And then I got to go back and look at the streaky part of it. Unless he means like the various either bad games or poor performances that he had. But I think in terms of his mechanics, his process, his ability to execute the scheme, like all those things are really, really good with CJ Stroud. And sometimes I think sometimes he wasn't subject to as much chaos as some other guys have had to become accustomed to. Best passer of the entire draft. He's athletically gifted, as he showed in that Georgia game. He can extend a play with his feet. Pretty cool under pressure. But I had a gifted offensive line in front of him. He still has a lot of football to learn. I really like the kid too, but he scares the bleep out of me. It's the processing skills of coverages. These guys are all over the place sometimes. They're like bipolar from one to the next. And then we've had enough of the negativity over the S2 scores. It does feel kind of sleazy talking about the S2 scores, and I don't know why. Somebody says, watch the Pat McAfee vid with the S2 test guy. The scores on the internet are highly inaccurate or even lies. Yeah, I know. We just watched that, man. Like, we just finished watching that. So I'm guessing you just joined. So thank you. We just, that's what we were just discussing. Texans have a separate cognition test. They don't use S2. I know. But like, this is the thing. Like, if Bob McGinn can get the S2 scores and put them out there, then other people can too. Like, Bobby Slowick just came from the 49ers, and Brock Purdy reportedly had a very high S2 cognition score. That's another good reason, though, to remember. Like, there are a lot of guys that score high who aren't good quarterbacks, and Bobby Slowick, if you like, these guys can get the scores. As far as the other separate cognition test that Nick Caserio talked, he was on. Was he on our show? No, that was on the. He was on in the press conference when he was talking about that. Yeah, like, presumably it would probably come up similar results. He might just be a bad tester on that stuff. Let's see. This is the same guy that was on social media during halftime and played better because of the mean comments. Was that C.J. Stroud? I got to get that one. I didn't hear that story. I know the Mayo story about Will Levis. I guess I need more C.J. Stroud stuff. Let's see. Don't you think Stroud and Watson being friends had any influence on Stroud's opinion of Houston and specifically Cal McNair? I don't know about, they share the throwing coach as well. Friends or association or whatever it might be, they run into each other. He's expressed his admiration for Deshaun. I think I would more worry about whether Deshaun would poison CJ Stroud's mind with the Texans. That might be a concern. Is there just nothing that's going to happen there? I think Deshaun, to his credit, and it's not like I give that out loosely or easily, but I think to his credit, he was very clear that, he didn't have an issue with Caserio. He never came right out and named ownership or named Easterby necessarily, but it's certainly, I think, if you connect A to B, a lot of it was, Easterby would likely be the guy talking about it, claiming that they have power, but they don't, when Deshaun said that. But he very much clearly said that, or made it known that he didn't have an issue necessarily with Caserio. I got to go back and fact check myself on that now. It's been forever by now. So it could be anything, man. It could be anything with that. The big thing to watch, honestly, is what happens if the Texans don't take C.J. Stroud. And people will be all up in arms that the Texans didn't take C.J. Stroud. But if he falls 10, 11, 12, does that all of a sudden, are those same people, the same people that were saying that the Texans could obviously never land, they could never land DeMeco Ryans, and they're such a hopeless, forlorn organization. I didn't hear a whole lot of people who are all irate about the Texans firing David Culley, both stumping for David Culley to get a new head coaching job and also praising the Texans for hiring DeMeco Ryans. There just wasn't a whole lot of eating of crow over that one. So we'll see what happens if all these people that have been flipping out about the Texans preemptively, doing things that they're rumored to do or not do. I don't know. I'm starting to get a little bit of cabin fever, as Landry Locker would talk about it. I went longer after promising to limit it to 20 minutes. We did 46 minutes here, everybody. So thanks for that. And apologies to the people who hate when I go long. Sorry. There we go. I like to go along with you guys because I can vent, and sometimes the comments give me much better ideas about what the hell's actually. I got to look up this C.J. Stroud Mayo story. He was just hungry and tired. Yep. Okay. So I'm going back in a little ways. Let's see. It's messed up to leak scores of CJ's low points when there wasn't context. Yeah. I mean, the way, Lance interviewed, I think, Branon Ally as well. And that's when they were talking about how there's 6 to 9 different categories, and some of them are relevant and some of them aren't. There's a lot of context that needs to be added to it, I think. Ohio State has good players, but Bama has a better scheme, so they hyped Bryce to 98 and dropped CJ to 18 for betting purposes. That's why the media is doing. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Nobody's come out and actually denied that those initial scores are correct. Branon Ally said that those 2 players who scored low, and the 2 lowest were Hendon Hooker and C.J. Stroud, of the leaked scores, that those are inaccurate. So as far as the media, it's Bob McGinn. It's one person. So I don't know about any of the other conspiracy theories. Oh, there's food that smells really good here at the studio. Then I might have to go. I'm going to hold off for a little bit. I want to get to the comments. Do you think the Texans would reach out to Stroud and ask him what happened when he took that test? Yes. Although, I mean, they're not supposed to be discussing that test. They would probably talk to David Mulligetta about it. I think that's something that, that's, again, getting back to Lamar Jackson and why I think he should have an agent. That's the kind of stuff your agent should be handling. That's and Mulligetta likely is. These types of things, like CJ Stroud doesn't need to be sitting around right now calling up 22 different teams that might be interested in him and telling him exactly what happened. It sounds simple, and I've learned this, though. I learned this from something I read from Bill Barnwell. Whenever you talk about doing 32 of something, it's a lot. So Barnwell does these pieces where he goes through each team, and you realize oh, wow, it sounds like no big deal. But then when you start researching for a half hour, an hour on each team. So likewise, that's why you need an agent, because when you're fielding calls from everybody or even 10 different teams, it sucks up a lot of time really quick. People just hating on CJ for no reason, I see. Isn't 18 inaccurate? Isn't 18 inaccurate? Oh, because he scored higher, or inaccurate because he was moody that day? Inaccurate, I guess, because the circumstances weren't pristine, and he did better when the circumstances were better, is what that guy would probably say. It's funny because Hendon Hooker, I guess because Hendon Hooker is the under-discussed guy, and I don't think he'd fall because of his cognition test. I think people think he's so unknown that they're going to, the S2 cognition test isn't going to kill him. Let's see. Why focus on a test versus what's done on the field? Good question. And that's why they don't use the Wonderlic anymore, because the Wonderlic was dumb. The Wonderlic was basically an academic test that had a bit of a correlation. You just didn't want quarterbacks to be below a certain score. But for the most part, some of the best and smartest quarterbacks ever scored a little above average for the average person standards on that test. But the really brilliant guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick and others, it wasn't evidence that they were football geniuses or anything. But the test is it's kind of a reaction time and visual test. You're doing it on a gaming monitor, and it tests your ability to see images. Some of the tests are this. You see an image is on the screen for 2 milliseconds, and what can you glean from it and what can you see about it? There are other ones where it has you it tests how many different objects you can track at one time. And it's been correlated to quarterbacks, safeties, and cornerbacks, especially. So if you think about those athletes and those guys who have to track multiple things going on a football field to an extreme degree and with a lot of precision, safeties and quarterbacks especially, it makes a lot of sense. So it's not an IQ test or anything. It's really more of it's a physical test. It just is measuring your vision, if you want to call that. It's a physical sense and your ability to process a lot of that stuff. That's why. Yep. Okay. We established that we had watched that already. Jay said that wasn't, so I don't know what that was. Mystery tweet could be referring to Mac Jones' second year, telling him that we believe in him. That must have been something you guys were discussing. Don't you think Stroud and Watson being friends? We discussed that. Do you think CJ could potentially do okay or good in a West Coast offense? Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. That's I think honestly, he does really well. I think when he can kind of be on script and be in his progressions without things breaking down. And in a West Coast offense, it's all about timing and rhythm. Take your 3-step, 5-step, 7-step drop, first read, second read, third read, and go. Like, I think that's when he thrives. So yeah, I think he could really do well with that. I think, and they've asked him to do, like, I don't like people, it's weird. I think sometimes people paint out the Ohio State offense as overly simplistic when that's not the thing. Like, they have some difficult reads in that offense. It's more when people are skeptical of quarterbacks that come out of that offense, it's a combination of the college elements and the fact that there's so many good wide receivers as of late that they feel like, okay, is he confident and decisive because he's naturally that way? Or does he just know that he has like 3 different future all pros out there on the field? That's where people get skeptical of it. But I think he could certainly do really, really well in that offense. I think it's made for him in a lot of ways because ball placement, run after the catch, all that's really important. And like, he calls himself a ball placement specialist, which is a smart thing to do. If you give yourself a unique nickname, people latch onto it. That's like when Howard Stern called himself the king of all media. It didn't make any sense, but like it sounded cocky and different, and like people latched onto it, and people would start referring to him as the king of all media, even though at that point he was still mostly just a radio guy. Let's see. I honestly feel our OC wants Anthony Richardson. Again, we need some dynamics to this offense. That would be the fun. That'd be the wrinkle that I'd be scared of, but also super excited about. Bijan at 12. Okay. Nick has been at times kind of like almost like existential in the way he talks about, like, hey, we can't guarantee there's even a tomorrow. And Sean and I were wondering, like, is this his YOLO moment? Has he been like reading some stuff this offseason where he's like, hey, like, you can't guarantee that anything's going to be around in the future. So why not live for today? Why not draft a running back, number 12 overall? And this is how you sell yourself on that, even though it doesn't make, even though, you know, you're not supposed to draft running backs unless you're in position to win a championship. Look, they're coming off of D'Amico and Bobby Solak are coming from a situation where Brock Purdy was made to look like the hope and the future, partly because Christian McCaffrey was there. You know, Jimmy Garoppolo was putting up those same or similar numbers as Brock Purdy as soon as McCaffrey got there and got integrated into the offense. I know that first game, he'd been there for like, 48 hours or so. So there might be something to that. There might and you know, they did it in Jacksonville, rookie quarterback, rookie running back, but they wasted a year with Urban Meyer. Jalen Peachy would tell you that second year running back he faced in Travis Etienne was like Petrie wasn't worried about the fact that, boy, they might not get a second contract out of him. I don't know. YOLO Nick. The tired, hungry player is not Stroud. Yeah, that was Hendon Hooker. Most likely because they went to the All-Star game. Let's see. Hold on to the ball too long. Watson. That is a problem that he has at times. Mac Jones could start day one, already familiar with our offense. I'm guessing you guys were discussing that. Well, we were discussing the Trey Lance trade. And Mac Jones or Trey Lance? Oh, boy. Compensation matters. Mac Jones or Trey Lance? Trey Lance. No. Oh, okay. I got to think about it. I got to do a separate show about this. I've been saying Trey Lance, and now I'm having second thoughts. All right. I'll do a power ranking of all the options, trades, rookies included with draft price. Boy, that shouldn't be that hard, should it? Vote on that. Tell me exactly who am I an idiot for not obviously preferring in Trey Lance versus Mac Jones? I don't feel like any of these quarterbacks lead to a Super Bowl except Bryce and a well-matured Will Levis. You could say maybe about, that's interesting. Like with Will Levis, is there a Joe Flacco quality where maybe he can be good enough, but in that one magical run to the Super Bowl, like Joe Flacco made a few throws that very other human beings could make, and like there's something to be said for that. Eli wasn't the best regular season quarterback, but he had a Robert Ory ability to just make the incredible clutch play in a high stress, high pressure moment that you couldn't see Kirk Cousins doing, you know? And I know, like, I'm sure Kirk Cousins has all kinds of circus plays and everything too. They all do. But like Eli's ability to almost be just too oblivious to the world to care or know the situation he's in. And like, I don't mean like in a stupid way, but just like, his heart rate doesn't change, you know? And his arm talent and his ability to do that. You could maybe argue yourself into that. I don't know though. I'd like can I just have Pat Mahomes? Can we not just do that? That's all. That's all I want. People didn't praise us about D'Amico. They are doubting. I don't know. There's a lot of praise about that. The people were skeptical. Like, I remember I showed you Keyshawn, and Keyshawn was saying, like, how come he couldn't get a better job than the Texans? Like, he could have, Keyshawn. That's the point. He actually chose the Texans. People were, it was funny. You're right, though, with D'Amico, it was almost like they couldn't process that the Texans had done a good thing. So they would go back and basically say, like, I don't like the things that the Texans have done before. So I don't like that they did a good thing now. Like, this is like what they would say. Yeah, but what about all this other stuff they did in the past? Like, yeah, you were telling us to do better than that. And like, now we're doing it. So you're still gonna beat us over the head? I'll beat you over the head. Not you guys. Appreciate you, Seth. Thank you. Thanks, Seth. Thank you. Nice chat. Thank you. Oh, this was 10 minutes ago when I said that I was about to leave, and then I got roped back in. Mac Jones mentioned mentored Bryce and is better than him. Okay. The agents, how to spin their clients. Yeah. Okay. Now I got to go. Thank you, everybody. I apologize for the comments that I didn't get to. And I'm going to try to do another one later today after I eat whatever I can smell wafting through the walls of the studio here at Sports Radio 610. More fixable, maybe young. Now, okay, yeah, you guys have some really good. Sometimes when I zoom through these, it doesn't mean that I'm dismissing them. It means that I'm trying to get out of here in under an hour. Thanks, guys.